Like I was in Brussels working, blah, 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 all nice and good. We got structural engineer plans, blah, blah, blah. I said 3 people were working based off that, which they were encoding what will get demolished and what not. So we're doing like, these pixel perfect apartment layouts, luxurious flats, whatever. They were the fucking wrong engineering plans. 2 weeks later, we find out like, our lovely apartment layouts don't fucking work because that shit does not get demolished anymore, and this shit does.
On large projects, you have so many people working on the designs, on analysis. You have a structural model, MEP model, architectural model. You have software that specializes in sprinkler design. So
yes.
The complexity is massive, and files simply are not delivering what people need. So that's where Speckle comes in.
We are not the company like, the LinkedIn story that goes now. LinkedIn is using all your data to like kind of train its AI. Like we're not those guys. We're essentially the guys that give you the data to do your own thing. In our past lives, we were doing a lot of that verticalization ourselves for companies like Arup or where we worked in the past. Now we realize that, okay, there's a bigger service we can bring to AC, which is giving the right foundations for others to build these vertical solutions like embedded carbon calculators, costing estimators,
issue tracking.
A
few presenters say, well, Speckle helped us automate 70% of the structural modeling or
BIM
generation from Grasshopper into Revit, because that was a very tedious task, and with Speckle they almost entirely automated it.
It's like Speckle is the best 3D data platform for developing web applications for.
We believe the community that we've built around Speckle to be the strongest assets that we have, and while people can take some of the open source code, build on top of it, or build a clone of Speckle, the community, the trust that we've built with them is not something you can build, overnight. So that's definitely something that helps us sleep well at night.
All right, guys, welcome back, episode 2.
Hello.
In episode 1, we touched on your guys' founding journey and briefly on Speckle. And in this episode, we'll go a little deeper. So in particular, we'll touch on your fundraising journey, and then we'll go more about the product and business model of Speckle. So in the first episode, you mentioned that in 2020, you raised some pre-seed money. So that was what gave you the that kick to go out and do this for yourself. So could you just talk us about perhaps who that investor was and why they invested?
Sure, yes. You want to kick it off, Matteo?
Of course. I think where we left it is that we were pitching, we were speaking with investors, we didn't really know what our go-to-market strategy was, how to structure a pitch deck, but we learned a lot, and the investors we were speaking with actually helped a lot. But we got many rejections, actually. I think...
How many?
Shockingly.
How many?
I mean, we didn't count, but I do remember us going through London left and right, and it was a bit dragging.
Yeah, I think Zoom pitch decks hadn't kicked off yet, so we were roaming around London quite a bit.
Must have been at least 50 people we've met.
Yeah.
Did you get like a consultant to help you with this, with pitch deck, or how to?
We had no idea such a consultant would exist. So we kind of went with the flow, and as Matteo said, first time we were asked, so where's your GTM slide? We were like, oh shit. Dude, what's a GTM? It's gin and tonic. So we learned as we went.
Hard way.
Yeah.
And I think, when was it? One day we met, and you're like, dude, I
remember this website.
There's an investor. I checked their thesis, and it's like describing Speckle, essentially.
Yeah, and then we couldn't find the website again, remember? Because it was fundamental, right? But we were like, fundamental, how do you spell that? There's a weird twist, and all hats off to Patrick and their PR. That's great. But they had a thesis online, and essentially was describing Speckle, the construction industry being, completely fragmented. There's nothing, aggregating data and bringing it together. And we thought, well, let's reach out. Yeah, so we sent Patrick an email, basically.
Cold outreach.
Cold outreach.
Um,
Did you attach the deck or not?
I don't remember.
I don't remember either.
Maybe we did.
But that led to a series of initial talks. There was interest, and I clearly remember, like, the second or maybe even first time we spoke, Patrick put us on the spot, asked us to fly to Berlin for an in-person meeting with very short notice, and we were like, oh wow, this is for real. This is happening.
Yeah. So we went.
So we went.
Patrick grilled us for one day, pretty much.
How far in time was it from the first interaction with them?
Not that far off, I think.
I think there was a bit of
Back and
due
forth.
diligence. So we put together a quick data room. I think they had already gone through it, right?
Probably, yes.
And it was the beginning of the new year, so early 2020. We flew there.
But they moved fast, so I don't think it was more than like 2 weeks, I would say.
Yeah.
From first contact to come over.
They were really afraid that someone else would put down a term sheet and bid them on time. So Patrick was definitely rushing us through the process. Yes, 100%. And we were, of course, victim of his game.
Were you playing the game? Like, oh, we're also talking to.
Not really, or not that well. So I think kind of.
They found us.
Yeah. Like if we're playing any game, it was by accident at that stage, quite sure.
We did manage to push back on a few things, so I think at the end of the day,
that was later.
It ended up being a very nice round. And I think what we really enjoyed of the process of speaking with Patrick first, how diligent they are, how precise, they went really deep about the product, numbers, everything, and we really appreciated their understanding of the space and the open source angle that Speckle has. I think that was something that, at least on my end, put me off when we were speaking to investors and we had to explain how open source works, that monetization is usually deferred until later stages, but we didn't have to do that. And they had perfect domain expertise and understanding, so it was a great fit that we managed to find.
Why did they invest?
Why did they invest? Well, to be honest, you should have asked Patrick this one, because what he probably saw was two first-time founders with loose control of, let's say, investment terminology and company building experience, nil. But I think we were very aligned on the thesis and on the core problem of an industry. And I think what I saw in Patrick, and by extension Fundamental back then, it's the hunger to find out the correct answers, essentially. Like, we didn't know together, in a sense, we didn't know how things are going to work out. Is this a real thing? Is this open source bet a correct bet? But they were eager to learn alongside us and support us in that journey and cover our, let's say, blind sides.
Yeah.
You mentioned there was one day of grilling. What was the grilling about? It was really one day of conversation?
Yeah, I remember very well. We did have, I think at the time, we did have good numbers around traction. So users, there was a product, there was, a user base, there were people adopting it. But where we were super weak was the go-to-market strategy, right? So we didn't really have a coherent plan. And I think the grilling went a lot about, so how do you bring this to market? How do you grow your user base? How will you eventually monetize? And I think that helped us a lot because we had to start thinking about a lot of those questions.
And during that day, it was also like when Patrick was challenging us on like bigger picture things around like the inner workings of the industry. So like our goal, now and then was to make Speckle an inevitable company to happen, right? And like for that, you need to kind of like situate yourself at the right kind of inflection points within the wider ecosystem. And that's, again, something we were trying to unpack during that day. Like how will construction fit in later down the line, for example? We didn't have a coherent answer. Now we're having a more coherent answer. How will you go outside of, let's say, AEC, if that is the case? Is this a problem that's prevalent outside or not? How does 3D data work in other places, file formats, etc.? So
it was a brainstorming session.
Yeah.
You
call it a grilling, but it sounds like more of a
he was asking most of the questions, and
But I think after that, we agreed that part of the business was not ready enough. So we spent some time with him. There were prompts, there were more helpful hints to help us, draft a more coherent story and strategy.
Did you have someone? So you didn't have anyone you spoke with simultaneously, right? They were the only one.
we had several conversations going on at that stage, actually. So Fundamental was not the only one. But none moved as fast as Fundamental. So
was it the pace, or maybe the content of Fundamental in terms of how good they were, perhaps, or how they handled you?
we were not educated enough to take this kind of, informed decisions back then.
Well, must have been intuition at least, yes?
Yeah.
It's, somebody with the courage to move fast alongside you, that goes a long way. So, that's what we saw in Fundamental. To a certain extent, them being informed about the construction industry, them kind of being very aligned with our thesis, definitely helped. And them not asking if Speckle is Photoshop for 3D. Yes.
And also just spending a lot of time with us was to indicate what the relationship will be after, the investment. Some investors might, just leave you alone, but, somebody wanting to commit and spend time during the due diligence process, during, the fundraising, is definitely gonna be by your side also afterwards. And, Fundamental has demonstrated to be doing that.
So after this meeting, when was a term sheet put in or decision of investment?
March, April, I think.
Yeah, a couple of months later. And I think these delays were also COVID and people...
Legal terms, that we had to iron out. But
we needed to find a lawyer.
we had small details.
Yeah.
Does VC pay for lawyers, or you guys have to pay for lawyers?
Well, it's a funny one.
Question, I don't know.
No, it's a funny one because when you read online, everybody says lawyer fees will be covered by the party investing in you because you're gonna use their money anyway to pay the lawyers. But ultimately, so far we will pay the lawyers.
We haven't played it well, but yeah.
Learning. So what's the makeup of the? In fact, before we get there, that was pre-seed, and you're now at Series A.
Yeah.
What were the amounts? Pre-seed, seed, Series A.
1, 4, and 10.
So 15 in total.
Yeah.
Very nice. And
1, 4, and 10?
1 million pre-seed, 4 million seed, 10 million Series A.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Yes.
It's cool. And what's the general makeup of the investors at the minute? So you've got Fundamental, sector specific, and then a few others. What's the makeup?
So Fundamental led the pre-seed round. It was just them and a few angels. So I think Fundamental put in 900K, and then we had a few angels. They rounded it up to 1 million.
How did you find the angels?
How did we find the angels?
Well, basically...
Networking.
By that time, we were doing a lot of heavy networking. And then we stumbled upon Carlos, basically a syndicate of angels, ex-Uber guys mostly. We pitched. They liked Speckle.
I think Patrick and Adam from Fundamental also put some angel tickets. From their network, there was also some extra contributions. Yeah.
Very nice. And how about the others then?
Then the seed round was led by Matrix Partners and Frontline together. That was 2 years later, 2022. Again, we had a host of other investors following, angels joining the round.
That's when we met Cocoa, Carmen.
I think the Sentry founders joined that round.
Yeah, Deck from Forward.
Deck, yes, Forward VC. They've all been extremely helpful in our journey so far. And then just recently, 2024, when was it that we closed? March, April again?
Yeah, terms were signed essentially on Christmas Day or on 24th of December, something like this.
It was an intense period.
It was an intense but short
period.
Yes.
We closed the last round in a month. At least the signing of the term sheet took less than a month.
And it was basically with Addition, Todd and Jack, which we've met in our seed round as well. Briefly, I think we were too early for them then, essentially. But also they are strong believers in our makeup. And
Yeah.
what they saw in Speckle is what we see in Speckle, and we're very happy to have them on board. Yeah.
Shall we move on to the product? So could you just recap the simple explanation of Speckle, and then we will go deep.
Okie doke. So the simple explanation of Speckle, you've coached us on this, so like the audience will know that we've been influenced. But how stuff is currently getting done, it's kind of very inefficient. You say file, export as IFC, you wait for 10 minutes for Revit to crash on you. In case it doesn't crash, you get an IFC file that you then attach to an email, or you put in a Google Drive or in a shared drive somewhere. Then you tell the other person, hey, I've sent you the updated structural plans, right? Then that other person opens up that file, maybe fails, maybe not, has to redraw on top because it's not the right thing, it's not in the right kind of layout that they were looking for. And all this process essentially takes, 2 days? And there's obviously a cost attached to it.
And on top of that, it's hard for people sometimes to tell, okay, what is the latest version of this design, right? You have files everywhere. The classic problem of renaming final 1, 2, 3.
Oh my
version,
God, yeah. And I'm going to share,
dates.
like one of the things that it's a personal experience that I used a lot when essentially talking to investors to kind of describe the problem, which is like, I was in Brussels working, blah, 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 all nice and good. We got structural engineer plans, blah, blah, blah. You said 3 people were working based off that, which they were encoding what will get demolished and what not. So we're doing these pixel perfect apartment layouts, luxurious flats, whatever. They were the fucking wrong engineering plans. 2 weeks later, we find out our lovely apartment layouts don't fucking work because that shit does not get demolished anymore, and this shit does. So,
and on top of that, also not being able to clearly see what were the changes, across versions. Again, you're always working on a new file, so all of that is missing. And on large projects, you have so many people working on the designs, on analysis. You have a structural model, MEP model, architectural model. You have a software that specializes in sprinkler design. So the complexity is massive, and files simply are not delivering what people need. So that's where Speckle comes in. The first value proposition is connectivity. What we mean by connectivity, and that there was a bit of a rebrand over the last years from interoperability, which not only is a hard to say word, but it conveys a bit the wrong message. Interoperability a bit conveys the fact that you have a model in one software and you can replicate it identically in a different software, but that's not the case. We think it's a bit of a fallacy. You can't really, seamlessly transfer, models across software.
Why not?
Because you have, for example, CAD software. It's just geometry, and you have building where it's parametric. There's metadata. So a wall in Revit won't be a wall in AutoCAD or in Rhino. It's going to be geometry. It's going to be.
But like for like, if you have 3D and 3D, can you do the interoperability?
The geometry, yes. At the geometry level, yes. Yeah. But when you're starting to talk more about BIM, and rich information, that's not possible. And we switch to the word connectivity because that better conveys what people are using Speckle for, is meaningful data exchanges. As Dimitri was saying, could be a floor plan. It could be column baselines from one software to the other.
It goes back to something we probably mentioned a bit earlier in the previous episode, which is it's about communication, right? Like when I say something, you hear it, you take it, you process it. It's the Chinese whispers game, right? You will always embody that and transform it in your head. And as you do this frequently with the people that you work with, you build shared context to the end that we're speaking the same language, or you just exchange center lines for columns because that's all you need, right? And this is the kind of meaningful design exchanges that Matteo was talking about. You don't need gigabytes of IFC files to just figure out what gets demolished or not.
Mm-hmm. So if someone joins the project as a third party, another consultant, do they see the revisions and changes that happened in the same kind of cloud?
Yeah, there's a whole essentially permissions infrastructure that we have built and maintaining and detailing as we go.
So just maybe do a quick step back. When you exchange information using Speckle, is not transactional, that is moving from A to B. It's persisted, it's stored in a central location, which is a server, of course. So it's available online, it's available via APIs, and it allows us to do all sort of cool things like version control, which means keeping track of every change over time, who's added what, who's removed what, and being able to restore previous versions if that's needed.
So it's really communication tool, actually, like different way of communicating, yeah, for the designers.
And this is where maybe the second value proposition of Speckle comes in, which is more around the collaboration. So once you have all your data in a singular hub that everybody can access, people can have model reviews online, looking at a 3D model that is synchronized and it spins at the same time in everybody's screens, instead of screen sharing and looking at PDFs and dropping comments and having to send these again as attachments around.
Question, is it not the case that it's difficult to have full interoperability because of how mechanics of files are being created, of like legacy software? Or what's the problem, like if we were to look at this from technical point of view?
So it's definitely a technical problem. One, it's an impossible, like there's different modeling paradigms that work better at different stages of design or for different disciplines. So as an architect designing a facade, I will use Rhino, right, which is a solid modeling tool that has a lot of bells and whistles and helps me control parametrically the facade that I'm designing, for example. But then if I am essentially at a later stage in design, or essentially like I'm a contractor, like I will use Revit, which is BIM models, right? Where you have all the associativity embedded, you have the concept of a wall, you have the concept of a column, you get quantities out and so on and so forth. Now, Rhino doesn't know what a wall is. Revit does. So when you swap data from one to the other, there are some magic tricks that we're doing to help these targeted exchanges, but you cannot have direct one-to-one interoperability. And that's kind of one of the big fallacies of the industry, is that they're, like AEC as a whole, they tried solving interoperability, right? And there is this magical idea in people's head that is this one-to-one translation is needed. Actually, it's a technical problem, that's a valid technical problem, but it's not the right problem. It's the communication layer is what you want to solve, is the why are we wanting these exchanges to happen in the first place? Right? To build buildings, to make sure I'm aligned with the contractor, and to make sure that the acoustic engineer has the latest kind of wall layouts that we have. Not interoperability is a technical problem. Connectivity and collaboration are ultimately the real problem, and where the kind of friction lies inside AEC.
I can see that. So instead of solving 100% this problem, which seems impossible, then you're trying to tackle almost 100%, but provide the right UX, perhaps, in the form of communication.
Exactly, yes. And there are, like, I mean, this is kind of risk getting very philosophical, right? So, like, maybe
go for it.
You should cut us off. Like, there is the IFC file format, right? Building Smart, which is theoretically supposed to define everything, every kind of element that exists inside the building industry, right? They have IFC toilet seats as an actual class element, if I'm not mistaken, right? Who the fuck needs a definition for an IFC toilet seat, right? Nobody. And it becomes a bit of a Tower of Babel problem, because now, the rail industry wants this, and so on and so forth, and you cannot really have a universal language. It's a very fragmented industry. But it's very efficient because it's very fragmented. That's a strength of it, right? It's resilient because it's fragmented. Maybe some chaotic in parts, but you need to enable that chaos and work with the human nature of how it's laid out.
I was going to say, on the point of real-time collaboration, so again, just a simple explanation for people. So this is where like a multidisciplinary team, i.e. an engineer, architect, acoustic designer, M&E consultant, whoever it might be, can all work within on the same design at the same time. So it's not a process of people having to, as you described earlier, save, send, open, save, send, open, go back and redo, right?
Exactly. Let's maybe break down what working together means. I think it's important to clarify that Speckle doesn't offer any authoring at the moment, so you cannot.
What is authoring?
Design. So you cannot draw in 3D, create,
And
elements.
at the moment.
At the
I
moment,
picked it up.
at the moment, we don't know what's going to happen later. You'll figure out in episode 4, I think.
Good teaser. You're doing a job for us.
Speckle relies on existing authoring and analysis tools, so the AutoCAD, the Revit, the Blender, to generate this data, and then it's stored within Speckle. We make it available to people without the need of relying on files. So, as you say, architects, engineers, they can all publish and load, consume this information at ease thanks to Speckle. But we're currently not, as I said, offering the possibility to generate some of this information.
Okay. Next one on your list of features will be data management. Why is that significant?
Well, just going back to the core problem, data is currently stored where? In files. A Revit file is essentially a huge database of information about a building. It's proprietary, it's tied to a specific Revit version. You need the license of Revit to see that information. If you want to know how many windows there are in a building, you have to open Revit. You need to install Revit, get a license, open the file, ensure it's compatible with the Revit version you've installed, and then maybe you can export a list of windows to know how many there are. So it's complicated, and then companies have become creative. They created their own databases and solutions to store some of this information. In Speckle, we're bringing all in the same place. And
so it's been 25 years since we have Revit, for example.
Yeah.
Right? And so there was no one trying to do it before you?
Well, that's what we mentioned, Flux, earlier. I think so. There were other companies that...
It's a precursor, for sure.
Yeah. Essentially tried doing this a bit.
Exactly the same thing or different?
Different, I would argue. In a sense, they different in many ways, actually. It's a fun story also with Flux. I almost killed Speckle because of Flux when I was at UCL.
You wanted to move?
No, it was basically they came out of stealth, and I said, why am I doing Speckle?
I was almost hired by Flux, actually.
Yes, so anyway, I guess luck made us take the right decisions. So you're asking about precursors. There was Project Quantum from Autodesk. There were things.
There were attempts.
There were attempts. Kind of what nobody really got right was the political angle and the technological angle, I would argue. The most important one is the political angle.
What do you mean by political angle?
When you store people's data, there's a huge amount of trust that people put into you, right? If you're proprietary and predatory at the same time, bye-bye trust, right? So this is why being open source is really core to our mission.
And it's not just for us. I think, if you're building infrastructure, and essentially Speckle is, offering infrastructure, it needs to be open source. And you can see the same in wider tech industry. I don't remember the percentage, but 70-80% of websites, are relying on open source technologies, open source databases. That's clearly the way to go. And Speckle is offering exactly that for the AEC industry.
Yeah.
I think it would just be important to explain, I don't think we've done it yet so far, just what is open source?
That's a very good question.
Yes. At its core, it's a licensing model for software, right? Whereas you license something as open source, it means that it's free, everybody can use it, take it and run it.
Modify, redistribute it.
Yeah.
So there's a whole code access that's built
that
anyone can go into and do what they want with.
Yeah.
As opposed to it being
not do what they want with it. It offers you, depending on the license, so this is when it gets hairy actually, depending on the licensing model, it gives you the freedom of usage of that software and seeing the code of that software, but it also comes with responsibilities, right? Some licenses are viral copyleft, is what they're called, which means that if you modify that software, you need to share everything back. Some are permissive, like we are going for, which we only say I think we're only protecting our trademark, actually, with that license.
Yeah.
So how does it work? If it's open source, then someone can change the code for this open source software, and then what if it's changed incorrect?
Then they can decide they can decide to keep those changes for themselves,
Or
and
to
this is
publish it.
called forking.
Yeah.
I take the code, I modify it, but I keep it for myself. And we've seen people do that with Speckle. You know, you can totally take the server, modify, customize it, and use it for your own needs. Second option, you could try to push your changes back to the mainline repository. This becomes contributing to the project. This is, of course, you know, the main form of modification that we encourage, because we want to benefit by from other contributions that come from other developers or organizations.
Community in general.
Yeah.
Have you got like incumbents asking for the license and then developing their own version within their organization, perhaps?
Well, we know definitely there are several white labeling exercises of Speckle, which is not something overall constructive.
But we've also seen a few vendors contributing.
Absolutely.
So we have seen a few developing connectors for Speckle, of course, for their own solutions. Top Solid is a very good example.
McNeil
We
at
had
the
support
start.
from
Yeah.
McNeil. Graphisoft was quite helpful. So
So it's
different
like, yes,
measures.
pros and cons, right? There's
Yeah.
there's obviously going to be some drawback to doing it, but ultimately your business is built around this whole open source model, so you're obviously convicted by it. Was it an easy decision to make it open source, or
Or that was your go-to-market, perhaps, or no?
I don't think it was as involved as that. Actually, it was. I made Speckle open source when I was at UCL, simply from, well, there's other reasons, but public money, public software. So let's put that tax money and give it, a greater good, right? And then coincidentally, that also helped solve the political problem, which is kind of key to the whole adventure, right?
So moving forward, what's the business model for the open source software?
So this has been an always evolving progress for us as a company. We from the first fundraise, from the first chats with Patrick, we started elucidating, understanding a bit more the concept of commercial open source, right? So sometimes there's a bit the misconception that open source has to be free, has to be kind of voluntary contributions without any commercial interest, but that's not the case. If you look at some of the largest exits and IPOs of the last years, it was involving open source companies or projects. So it is viable. Here we're following in the footsteps of GitLab, Sentry.io, Elastic, MongoDB, Automatic, and WordPress. There's plenty of examples of very successful open source companies. So we are not hiding anything. There are no secrets. Speckle is open source. What we're monetizing on is the SaaS, so software as a service, hosting, maintaining service for customers, and we're starting to add some proprietary features on top that we can also monetize and sell under maybe a different label of Speckle.
Yeah.
It's a a never-ending process. Here we are relying on our community to tell us what is that they need as open source and what instead could be meaningful to monetize.
Yeah.
So where are you now on this journey? Do you have paying customers, or?
We do, yes. We're still at the beginning. Overall, as far as we see our world domination plans, it's still the early days of success. So
the focus so far was building, the product, the community, and we are starting now to, again, as I said, explore with our customers, and partners how to monetize. But ultimately, we are, converging to the idea of having three main plans: the free plan, a team plan, and enterprise. Mm-hmm. Free meaning basically what Speckle is at the moment, entirely free, almost no limits, and then team and enterprise plan just start adding value on top of that for medium or organizations or very large ones. So here we are talking about compliance, SSO, security, backups, features that people in the free plan don't usually really need, right?
I think it's an interesting conversation because on one hand, the designer already is paying for software, right? So then there is your layer on top of that. Would you say, if that's not can be said actually, what sort of percentage of cost of the software you thinking your software will cost, or you can't calculate that this way?
We don't really calculate that way. The way we see it, so it's all product-led growth. So far, we focused on essentially building something that designers, architects, engineers love to use, and that's like visible in the numbers. Now, with that success, a new kind of person started sneaking in, which is the project manager, the IT guy, right? They're asking like, so what's your security compliance? Can I get SSO so that user provisioning, so that if I fire myself, I will be automatically removed from the system and I won't have access to that data anymore, and so on and so forth. These are things that are very important to essentially enterprise level software that we haven't focused on until basically 4 or 6 months ago.
Or an even important one is data residency, right?
Again, where is it stored? Yeah?
Where is my data stored? So that's probably the most common question that we get in our inbox, and the answer is we are building our enterprise offerings so that you can host your data wherever you want. So at a project level, when you create a new project in Speckle, you can decide which data center will essentially host the data. And again, these are not features that individual users really care about, but it's the organizations behind them that have to comply with the regulations, project requirements, and so they would be willing to pay for a team or enterprise plan just to access these.
Regarding customers,
Yeah, business model. I was going to say, let's move on.
yes. Who are your customers? Like, what's the person? Well, not names.
Ideal customer persona.
ICP.
Our ICP depends on at which stage we're asking, because it's like there's a two-tiered approach, right? So there's the kind of like user level, like people that use Speckle now, and there's the people we're going to sell Speckle to, and we are selling Speckle to. Those are two different things. In terms of business model, ICP, kind of, we have a very wide and definition of it. It's just like a medium-sized team that works on a medium-sized project. If they want to be contractually compliant, they will need to essentially have either an on-premise self-hosted Speckle server or ask us to essentially do that for them.
What's the contractual requirement? You mentioned they want to be...
Security, data residency, data access policies, and so on and so forth, like all the stuff, uptime guarantees and so on. Like Speckle being an online service, there's a lot of complexity that's very... It used to be less, but anyway, alas, we've grown in running it, right?
And your customers would be like geographically spread across the world, or perhaps in Europe or somewhere else?
Anywhere, really. There's no borders. Of course, we see patterns where, countries where they're relying more on BIM, on advanced technologies. Of course, there's more of an uptake of Speckle as a solution. But yeah, we've seen people using it all over the world, essentially.
And are these their professions, architects?
Mostly architects and engineers. So medium, large organizations that rely on architectural engineering software, primarily the software that we currently target with our connectors. So Autodesk solutions, we have all the structural connectors, CSI suite, some of the Bentley products, Excel, Power BI, and so on. But also Blender, SketchUp. There's a host of software we integrate with.
The engineering profession would benefit if you could make Tekla data be opened in Advanced Steel data.
Well, we are actually doing that. Advanced Steel has been sunsetted by Autodesk, so we actually have a community contributed connector for it, but we're thinking to not maintain it as it's been sunsetted by Autodesk. So you'll need to qualify that for us. We can invest in Advanced Steel.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about perhaps go-to-market partnerships, your community, which we'll touch on, but go deeper in the next episode. So targeting customers, geography doesn't matter too much. How do you get to these people?
Cold outreach.
No, they come to us.
I think the question, how do they find Speckle? And I think the most typical scenario is architect, engineer, they have a model in Rhino, for example, they need to get it in Revit. The existing solutions that just don't make the cut, so they end up Googling, how do I do this? And that's where Speckle usually comes up. So
like Stack Overflow?
Well, our tutorials, our videos, there's a lot of content that is generated by our users, by our community. So it's mostly organic and word of mouth.
Yeah.
And that sounds like it was sort of embedded in your roots from day one when you had the community.
Pretty much. It's like, how did you hear about Instagram? That's a similar motion that we're going
and
through.
in a way, Speckle is viral by nature, by being a collaborative platform. You create a project, you can share a model with a link, with a URL. So you just paste it in your company Slack, then your team member join, and it spreads very quickly.
I think the advantage of it is that architects and engineers work in their software most of the day. So if they find a solution which helps them, straight away they think about it.
Yeah.
What's the user growth that you have, or what can you say about it?
Higher than we want it to be sometimes. So, because that also comes with responsibilities.
Totally.
Yeah, but we've seen 20% month over month.
Wow.
Or quite sustainable.
Does this become like consultancy to some point, to a degree, that you have to have someone who will take care of this customer and run them through, especially if they are larger?
We see this as mostly community work right now. So what we're trying to do, and I think Jonathan and Senda will talk more about this in the next episode, is teach people how to fish rather than give them the fish. So
Yeah, good demo. Okay, how about partnerships? Do you plan to get into people from an early age, i.e. through university?
well, that's funny enough you mentioned university. There was a tweet, I think like a month ago or something like this, that I saw, which was like random uni professors saying architecture students now in presentations, so here's the mirror board with my Speckle model embedded inside of it, right? So it is in a sense happening, and I think on the academic front we've seen a lot of universities leverage Speckle to teach about data in AC.
What's also very encouraging, we are seeing more and more startups building on top of Speckle. So they could take the whole product, or sometimes just parts of our technology. Could be maybe the viewer, could be just the connectors, but they build their business, their products on top of Speckle as a solution. So that's very encouraging, because it means we're not just serving the needs of individuals, but other companies are relying on our technology for data exchanges, for collaboration, and whatever else.
Yeah, and sometimes we're thinking to formalize some of these relationships into partnerships, but funnily enough, most of the times we can just deal on pure, let's say, open source basis, which is...
So sometimes the fun thing is we don't know about these companies until they reach out to us because they have issues.
Or there's a PR, like, hey, this fixes this problem that I have.
And we actually have a community stand-up happening soon where Stika is presenting how they built their solution on top of Speckle, and there's many more. But again, some of these we only find out after they already have a product, they have users. It's amazing.
Yeah, that's so funny. People using your stuff, but you don't even know who they are.
Yes.
Yeah, but this is I suppose it's the whole notion of community-led, just going to organically keep growing, and then it sounds like you're now on the path to find out how you commercialize what you've already built.
So you mentioned two products. Connector, was it?
Yeah.
And another one?
Collaboration.
So that's a product within Speckle.
We see them as two important verticals.
Main value proposition, it's a bit how we...
Okay, and that's like 80% of a core business, or?
It's right now, it's essentially the main growth drivers, yes.
There's a third one, but then we're going to get a little bit more technical. It's the whole automation side of things.
Let's try.
Do you want to take this? Well, yes, I can. There's all these stupid mistakes that people make while they draw stuff, right? While they model, while they design, and so on, that surface up usually quite late in the process or at inconvenient times. And there's a lot of manual labor in checking, do all the doors have the correct fire rating, and so on and so forth.
Or just building codes that people need to comply.
Yes, right. Or even simpler stuff like, we have our office standards, or how, we were talking with Woodsbagger the other day with Shane. All our Rhino models are supposed to be structured in a specific way, right? That's brings clarity to the office, and yes, of course, things slip. And you only find out just one day before the deadline that our model is a mess and that you need to go up and down and spend the whole night cleaning it up. Now, a lot of that can be automated away with very simple checks, and this is kind of the infrastructure, the third component essentially in the Speckle hub, which allows people to kind of codify these simple rules, or actually codify things from very simple rules, like is the fire rating of the door correct or up to the code, all the way to essentially CFD analysis, if you want to, and all the way to essentially whatever AI-driven workflows people want to do, and have those run continuously on the clock on every change, and informing me, the designer, in the right place inside the authoring app that, hey, actually you've just pushed this change, that beam is slightly out of whack, that element does not have the right properties, it's against the project standards. Maybe you want to check it. So this is automate, essentially.
And these checks, companies, organizations, especially the more advanced ones, have been developing for years, but they were lacking a platform, a place where to run them, at scale. So usually they just run on users' machines, little scripts, hacky solutions that they have, that they run from time to time, very project-specific. With Automate, we're giving them an opportunity to run them on every project automatically, when there's a change. So that's quite cool.
Within these automations, is it where the word AI comes in, or?
We position ourselves as kind of, what does AI need? Data.
Yes.
So we are ultimately selling a lot of shovels to companies wanting to embark on this
Gold rush.
Gold rush, right? We are not the company like, the LinkedIn story that goes now, LinkedIn is using all your data to kind of train its AI. We're not those guys. We're essentially the guys that give you the data to do your own thing.
And we have seen actually both community contributions and partners and organizations adopting Speckle, building already some AI or machine learning based tools on top of their data that they're hosting in Speckle. So we've seen chatbots, we've seen language models built on top of Speckle data, essentially.
What was very interesting you said earlier was that you see startups working on your software to develop their own, probably more vertically oriented solution.
Mm-hmm.
Have you not thought about this yourself? Apart
course.
from just growing the platform, try to dive into?
Look, before, in our past lives, we were doing a lot of that verticalization ourselves for companies like Arup or where we worked in the past. Now we realize that, okay, there's a bigger service we can bring to AC, which is giving the right foundations for others to build these vertical solutions like embedded carbon calculators, costing estimators,
Issue
tracking.
So you will be like App Store.
We don't see ourselves necessarily. The App Store comes with its own kind of weighted things. Investors will ask all sorts of different questions and so on. We are staying away from that metaphor for now, but we are definitely, let's say, a technological layer that is useful for this point of view. And yes, there are plenty of apps being built on top of Speckle and using Speckle. So,
how do you guys approach product development?
There's this Ouija board, and then we summon the ghosts, and we figure out what we do.
Next one.
It's been rather easy when it comes to how to prioritize things. The community has always helped us there, guide us towards the meaningful workflows that they need. And there's a bit of tit and tat where we kind of take that feedback, we try to abstract it away into something that's meaningful for us and generally applicable rather than solving an isolated pain point, and we deliver on that. It's not easy. We have a very wide surface area, so sometimes we've cornered ourselves.
And the hardest thing, I think, is really keeping focus, right? By being such a general use platform, it's really hard sometimes to know what are the right things we should focus on. And our users, our partners and customers, they always ask for different things. So saying no has been probably the hardest.
Yeah, saying no
so
is
far.
actually harder than saying yes.
What's the criteria to this? If you have a number of votes that want to say this feature to be changed or done?
We of course have our vision of where Speckle should be, which is a bit helping us guide through every hard moment, but definitely the volume of users asking for specific features versus another, customers versus not customers, of course, affect some of these decisions.
So customer is not always right.
No, we have to say no many times to customers, unfortunately.
Yeah, we are
The classic Henry Ford quote, etc.
And one thing I get from you guys is you have you're quite focused. There's like a culture I can feel that's like Speckle's built around through like the open source, how you guys met, how you have a distributed team. I think you mentioned some offsite stuff as well. So how do you view? Also, sorry, you have SpeckleCon and events, and I'd say your brand is quite like disruptive. Is that maybe
not typical? Right?
Yeah. I don't know if that's the word you want to be associated with. Okay. So how do you approach culture?
Oh, tricky.
it's a very difficult one, but it starts from the beginning, and I think that the culture is defined by the people you surround yourself with. And this is tricky because, it means everybody who joins Speckle, the company, kind of needs to essentially help enrich that culture, right? And there's also like moments when this doesn't work. But in a surprisingly democratic way, we all agree on what the culture should be and look like.
Yeah. Essentially, I think you need to invest in that. It's not something that, gets created on the side. Like we spent quite a lot of time discussing our values, when we meet face to face at retreats. It's usually one of the topic. What do we want, the future of Speckle to be? Let's define our values. One of these, for instance, is being community first. That means everyone, starting from, the developers, the growth team, or anyone in the company needs to be there for our users. So, that's a core principle, and making sure that these are shared and communicated with everyone in the team, and then everyone that we hire going forward embeds, a good portion of these values has been the recipe for us to get there in a way.
So for now, you're seeing most customers would be a developer type of customer, or perhaps architects or engineers?
It's a mixed spread.
Mixture, yeah.
Like, would you attach percentage to it?
No, we wouldn't actually. There's our early adopters were very technical people, right? So that came with its own kind of cultural geekiness and technocratic democracy in a sense. As we grew, more and more essentially diverse set of users started coming on board, and they've always fit in, right?
And I think the more technical you are, the more you can leverage our solution, but it's not required, right? So we have, perfectly non-technical users leveraging Speckle on a day-to-day.
And the number of these users is very limited as well, very technical.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You have, people who are just developers and don't know anything about Revit that, again, are using it.
One of you guys mentioned quirky assignments.
Our stand-up assignments, yes. Yeah, we do. We have this, one of the rituals, and we're iterating on these rituals like continuously. But one of these rituals that we have is that every Friday, right now, it used to be every day actually, but that became unsustainable once we reached a certain size. Like there's a rotating chairpersonship, right? So today it's me, tomorrow it's Matteo, and so on and so forth.
This is for the daily stand-up, right?
Yeah, that person has the responsibility to come up with a little assignment. Like it can be anything.
What's your favorite movie? What was your latest takeaway order?
Yes,
picture
what your superpower, so on. As all sorts of and this way you find out a lot of funny things about people, right?
And this goes again onto the distributed nature. You need to find ways to create that sense of place to let people interact. You don't have those water cooler conversations, so trying to promote some healthy, informal chit-chat and banter is definitely the goal here.
Yeah, one that I remember distinctively was naming Jonathan's sheep. So he can talk more about that in the next episode.
We'll ask that. What are your superpowers?
Oh my God, I forgot what I answered. Definitely not memory.
None.
No stress.
Being average.
Being average.
Maybe a couple more. I think just is there This is Martin's question, and he loves asking people this about return on investment.
Right.
Is it, okay? What I don't think answers like we save you 64 hours per second.
Maybe Martin wants to answer.
Yeah, I
this
wanted to
question.
actually I wanted to ask maybe not about ROI because I think that might be tricky to answer, but what your customers are telling you their ROI is.
Yeah, actually we have this taped from, some of this is taped from the last SpeckleCon that we held. We did have a few presenters say, well, Speckle helped us automate 70% of the, structural modeling or
BIM
generation from Grasshopper into Revit, because that was a very tedious task, and with Speckle they almost entirely automated it. Time saved for sure. Again, I don't remember the numbers, but maybe a 30% time save on, again, design specific tasks. What else do we have?
I mean, Stika, one of the companies building stuff on top of Speckle, says like, Speckle is the best 3D data platform for developing web applications for, right? So you can extrapolate from that what you want. It's tricky, like we haven't yet reached as a company the stage where we're marketing essentially specifically these kind of numbers. For us, it has always been rather easy to spread by saying, hey, look, this is Speckle, it's cool, use it if it makes your life better. If the answer is yes, keep on using it. So far, people have kept on using it and the charts have gone up and to the right. Now, though, we're entering a kind of more, let's say, high school stage of Speckle as a company, where actually, yes, we are encountering these people that ask questions like you ask, Martin, right? Like, how can we, quantify this and so on.
I think that's important from a business point of view, from the other side.
Definitely, and also exciting for us because so far, we've been developing a cool product and maximizing that as much as we can.
Yeah.
Now we're shifting gears towards hey, actually, we can sell this as well. So.
Until now, we didn't really need to do that because it was the end users who would do the selling for us, right? So the architects, engineers adopting Speckle, starting to use it, they would do the selling to the managers and say, well, I need it on this project because this specific task would take me so long otherwise. So in a way, we were not sometimes directly exposed to the ROI, but the managers, the people who actually have purchase power would, and that's how a lot of the enterprise conversations have started.
Any feedback from smaller one-man band architects?
Oh, plenty. You should ask the venture capital people. They did some very thorough due diligence, more thorough than us, and it's even small companies value Speckle quite highly on a day-to-day usage, right? So that's very encouraging for us to see.
Very good.
Last one from you.
How defensible or defensible
Good.
Yes.
is Speckle compared to potential attack from the industry of existing incumbents, for example?
I think here the best answer is a perfect plug into the next episode, because we believe the community that we've built around Speckle to be the strongest asset that we have. And while people can take some of the open source code, build on top of it, or build a clone of Speckle, the community, the trust that we've built with them is not something you can build, overnight. So that's definitely something that helps us sleep well at night.
Very good.
Yeah, I mean, we are building an inevitable company. That doesn't mean we sleep well at night because we're doing nothing. But
absolutely,
yes.
Many challenges ahead still.
Sounds like the perfect plug for the next episode. So that brings us to the end of episode 2. And in episode 3, we'll be joined by Senda and Jonathan to talk about community-led growth and this whole notion around community. So
Awesome.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks to you.
Community for Speckle is anyone who has heard of Speckle, has touched it, has made use of it, has shared what they've been using Speckle for. That's the biggest picture, because some people, the experience or touch points are sometimes completely disconnected.
But across AEC, and Jonathan mentioned this as well, there are already micro communities that I think Speckle serves, whether it's through the forum or through finding them again where they are. Okay, I have I have strong opinions on this because as a marketing person, and any marketer will relate, if your customers don't want to talk to you, you can't really do your job. So, and one thing I found so impressive and refreshing at Speckle is since day one, I was already talking to users. And I was like, this is quite, you know, and the community is very open to collaborating with us. And I think being community-led gives us that direct line of not only feedback, like they're a part of shaping the product, but also part of our marketing strategy. Like,
So for people in AEC building communities or trying to build a community, what advice would you give them?
one thing actually maybe also relates to an advice to any future community builder. It's effort versus impact. This is something I try to think of myself every day, but it's really hard. How can you maximize your initiatives to make sure that it's actually leading to something that's measurable and that you can repeat in a way that's going to lead to growth? And once you figure that out, it changes the entire game.